All right, so let's see where we left off last time. We had implemented the login functionality for our application. Let's see where we are with that. So here's the home page that is being loaded dynamically from the routing mechanism that we introduced last time. Right? Notice that here we're loading the index page, right? And that after the index page we have this hash bang and then slash. The content that comes from the server is this, right? Where there is no content, right? We just have a head, right? That just loads libraries and dependencies and style sheets, right? And down below also we have just links to JavaScript libraries. So there is no real content. The only content that is coming here for rendering is this empty div. There's nothing there. But we see that if we actually look at what the browser is interpreting, right? So this is what's coming from the server. The browser has a different view. Notice that this is the div with the ng view, which is this one right here. Right? But from the browser's perspective, there's plenty of content here. Right? There's this nav and this div, and there's all these divs down here, right? And those were rendered dynamically by the browser. Right? It went and fetched the content that we needed to inject into this div dynamically. If we look at the network and we refresh, we'll see that first we load the index page, which really doesn't contain anything. It's just the empty div, right? That's what comes from the server. And then we start loading other libraries, Angular min, route, app.js. And app.js is configured that to look at what's happening after the hash sign here, right? And it says here that if you see the hash sign, then the home.html should be loaded. Yes? Should be injected into the ng view. And that's exactly what happens a little later. Notice that Angular routing goes and fetches home.html. Goes back to the server as a second call, right? And says, okay, give me now home.html because I've been told that I need to inject it into the ng view. Okay? And indeed, there it is, right? Here's the nav, which gets added to the ng view dynamically. Make sense? Right? Now, if we keep going and clear this, we also worked on a couple other routes. For instance, logging in the login. Notice that the browser went out again to the server to fetch the login template. See that? Right? And injected it in the same ng view, right, that the home page was in. Right? So if we inspect, we'll notice that the same ng view that earlier had the home HTML template in there is now hosting the content for the login page, right? All the login and so on and so forth. If we go back and go back to the home, you'll notice that again the content has been added for the home, right? In the same ng view of the same index page. Yes? But notice that the navigation back and forth, right, did not generate, right, a second call for the home.html, right? Angular caches all these templates as they're downloaded for the first time from the server, right? No second navigation. We don't request the template again because we already have it on the browser. Notice that if I navigate back to the login, notice that there was no second call back to the login. See that? Because I already have it. I had already gone to the server to fetch it. Right? There's no need for me to go fetch it again. Make sense? Right? If I navigate to the register, I will go fetch the register. Right? If I cancel and go back to the login page, notice that the login page is not loaded again. If I go back to the register, notice that there's no second call for the register.html. So these are all cached by Angular as DOM objects, and they're being swapped back and forth into the ng view as you navigate. Make sense? All right. If this were a classical implementation of navigating with hyperlinks or server side, right? typically all these calls would be individual calls back to the server. And the server would serve you exactly the same content that was there a minute ago, right? Well, maybe some changes here and there, but most of it would be the same, right? So we are saving on those network calls that we don't need for, right? Let's continue. We had done logging in. We had an error, right? If the user was not there, and if we had the correct user, we navigated to the profile page. Notice that the profile page was loaded. We went to fetch the profile page to display it here dynamically. Yes, right? And if we logged in as someone else, Alice, log in. Notice that the profile page has been rendered again, but we don't fetch it again. The only change here is the user information, right? And that data we are hosting locally for now in a mock array of users. Okay, eventually that will migrate to the server, right? And as we migrate to the server, this is the only thing we'll need to go fetch from the server, right? Since we already have the templates, the only thing missing is the data, right? That's going to live on the server, so we're not going to go fetch the templates, but we are going to have to go fetch the user information, and that will be done next week when we introduce web services, right? Which are going to allow us to expose data models, right, to third party, anybody who wants this information, and anybody who's authorized to use this information, right? Make sense? Now, even that can be cached as well, right? If data is always going to be the same, right, there's no point in always fetching the same information, right, for the same request, right? We can configure Angular to cache some of that information as well, right? And we'll see how to do that next week. All right, so let's see. So that's an overview. Let's see a little bit about the implementation. Let's see. We went not for undergrads. Let's see, graduate. We implemented definitely the index page. We implemented the app.js. Right. This is our application where we declared our WAM top level module, right? That depended on the routing library for Angular, and that library provided us with a route provider that allowed us to configure the navigation, right? And this is an effort to implement model view controller best practices, right? To decouple the navigation from the front end, right? Instead, give it to a centralized controller that is responsible for the navigation and the logic of the application flow. Make sense? All right, as opposed to spreading out that logic across many artifacts, it now lives in a single artifact, okay, or at least a fewer number of artifacts, as opposed to navigation spread over many different HTML pages. Here we have a single place, or we can have maybe 2 or 3 just dedicated configuration files. Okay. So we did a login, where we can navigate to a login page, and we have controllers for each one of these. Same thing for the profile, right? We also took a look at how we can pass parameters in the URL, right? That can be mapped or can be parsed from within the controller, right? So we took a look at that in the views. So for under the users, the controllers, we saw that we could navigate from the login, right? If we found a user, we would say that the current user didn't exist, or if we did find a user, we navigated to the profile programmatically, passing the ID of the user that we found in the attribute, right, as a parameter in the URL. And from the controller for the profile, we parse that ID from the route parameters, and we used it to retrieve the user from the service. The service, right, was used to centralize all access to the data, right, providing several APIs for being able to manipulate this data. We only focus on read operations, where we can retrieve a user if we know their ID, or we can retrieve a user to see if a user with those credentials exists, right? But certainly any other access to this data type, right, would be centralized all here in one single place. Make sense? All right, so that's an overview of where we are so far. Let's keep on working on this, okay?